first black men to enlist in the United States Marine Corps could not have known then, back in the 40s, that they were making history. Recently, we aired a documentary about the Montford Point Marines, whose challenges and achievements went unmentioned and uncelebrated for decades. Locally, a South Florida woman is working to find and identify every one of them. And when Local 10's Liane Morejon aired a report about that, something magical happened. Watch.
And that's him.
Last month, I met Mallory Berger of Coral Springs. In 2021, she discovered her late grandfather, Maurice L. Burns Sr., was one of more than 20,000 men known as the Montford Point Marines.
They knew they were the first to integrate the Marine Corps, but they could not realize the significance of it at that time.
The discovery inspired a mission.
And I proactively find the families, or if I'm lucky, the living Montford Point Marines, so that we can get their Congressional Gold Medal awarded to them.
In the early 1940s, black Marines were kept separate from their white counterparts. They weren't allowed to train at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina with the white Marines, so they were sent to Montford Point, forced to build their own camp in swampland, train in dangerous conditions, and endure racism and slurs. Despite the added hardship, they broke many Marine records, and the men were called to fight, and in some cases die in the Pacific.
The evidence of any kind of trauma, they were very good at hiding it.
Due to poor record keeping, only about 10% of Montford Point Marines have been identified, and it's rare to find one still living. Those still around are in their 90s or older. Time is running out to honor them with a replica of the Congressional Gold Medal awarded collectively to the Montford Point Marines in 2012.
It's a little recognition of who they were and what they did.
Our story yielded the discovery of a living Montford Pointer in Lauderhill, 101-year-old Corporal George Johnson.
Where I've been, you won't believe it.
I just was dumbfounded and in shock. This is like being in the presence of Prince or Michael Jackson. I mean, really.
We know that time may not be on our side. For us as a black family, it is extremely important and also is very honorable that we have a living legend living here with us.
2 other South Florida families found Montford Point links because of our story. Corporal Mose Williams and Private First Class Joseph Brinson have passed away, but their legacy as Montford Pointers is now secured.
And Liane Morejon here for today's Reporter Debrief. Welcome to your inaugural TWISF engagement.
It is an honor. Thank you.
So that is, we're talking all about African American history. That is so cool. How did you connect that?
So I actually have a Local 10 viewer to thank for that. Someone reached out to us. They had seen the promos for the documentary that was going to be airing after our Martin Luther King Day Junior Parade coverage. And they said, hey, one of the people that's featured in this documentary is actually from South Florida. So I went and watched the documentary. I got some names, and basically I was able to track her down, and she was willing to do an interview. I also pitched the idea to sort of tie in with all our coverage, and it totally worked out.
Took on a life of its own.
Absolutely, yeah. And I couldn't have imagined it, and I'm really thrilled that.
So I'm kind of ticking off in my head, calculating. I don't do math so well, but from 1940s, I'm not sure that there's many of these people who are still around to talk to. So what an amazing time and moment in time to be able to, rush, find these people, put it on the air. And then when this aired, you got more calls.
Yeah, so we did get a call at our assignment desk from Grace King, who you saw briefly in our story. And she said, my cousin, who I take care of now, is 101 years old.
Wow.
And he has told us growing up.
That's who was in the piece.
Yes, about her cousin, Corporal George Johnson. And she said, he always talked about his time in the Marines. He even mentioned that he once took prisoners to Alcatraz. He just mentioned all these details, and they thought, this is weird, maybe the timing matches up. And sure enough, he still had his discharge papers. They were able to look at them, and right there on the bottom it said Montford Point.
Why do you think that this amazing historical troop of people we didn't know about until, I guess I don't want to say no one knew about it, but in the public venue as such a moment in history and such a beautiful piece of the tapestry of the U.S. military? Where has that knowledge been?
It's it's existed, right? But it's sort of been swept under the rug. And I think that there's a few reasons for that. Number one, let's go back to when this integration began. First of all, to even get blacks to be part of the Marines, as part of those who were fighting, was a fight in itself. They had to go to the leadership. They actually went all the way up to the president and said, basically, if we don't start integrating these branches of the military, then we're going to march on Washington. So they started letting black men join the Marines to train to fight, because before that, anything that they were part of as far as the military was in a support role. They were not allowed to be soldiers or Marines like the white men were. And so once you started getting that, well, now you're in the door, but guess what? You're still black, so we're going to treat you as such. And so they were subject to racism. They were forced to build their own camp. They were not allowed to train at Camp Lejeune with the white Marines. Even to step foot in Camp Lejeune, they had to be escorted. Yes, so they were given this plot of land that was sort of near Camp Lejeune in North Carolina that was absolute swampland, and they had to build it quite literally from the ground up.
Wow. So there is not only the people, but the story behind it. You are so immersed in it now, I can see. So you come into this home, and here's Corporal George Johnson, 101, looking at least probably 20 years younger. What was that reaction? What was that moment like?
Well, it was really great to not only meet him, but also to meet his family.
Yeah.
They were so thrilled about this, and also that he, you know, as the phrase goes, gets his flowers before it gets too late, because they obviously have concerns about his health and just how much longer he would be around to be able to get this congressional medal replica.
So there is a congressional medal for the Montford Point Marines, and then do they get a medal? Does he get a medal?
Yes, so there was one that was issued as a collective in 2012. There was a, that had to go through Congress and everything to actually get to that point. They were awarded as a collective, and then individual Marines or their families, if they've passed on, can get this replica that you're looking at now. That's the replica that Mallory Berger has on behalf of her grandfather, who was a Montford Point Marine, and that's kind of what started the ball rolling for her to get involved, was her own grandfather's connection, which, interestingly enough, she said he never discussed, ever.
Why do you think that is? Did
Well,
she say?
she says that she believes it's partly maybe just the trauma of not just the hardship of being a Marine at that time, but also what they observed.
World War II.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of them did fight, some of them did die for this country, and then on top of it, just everything they were subject to. I mean, these Marines would go into town and be doubted for being Marines if they were wearing their uniform. They'd see a black man in a Marine uniform and say, "There's no way. What are you doing?" I mean, it's basically being accused of stolen valor, which is like the phrase we hear now.
What history to be told. So tomorrow is a ceremony of some sorts. I'm sure you'll cover it. Tell us about that.
So, as you saw in the piece, Corporal George Johnson, who is luckily still very much with us, and the family of Corporal Mose Williams will receive this Congressional Gold Medal replica. A lot of things needed to be done to make this ceremony happen, because typically, if other Montford Pointers were discovered, they would wait until August when they kind of do a reunion of sorts over in North Carolina. Family didn't want to wait that long.
At 101, you cannot blame them.
The time, the clock is ticking, and so they wanted to make sure this happens. So it's happening tomorrow at noon at the African American Studies Library in Fort Lauderdale, and it is open to the public. There's a private reception after for family, but the actual ceremony itself is open. So if anyone wants to attend, I know some local veterans have expressed a desire to attend. It is open.
That's amazing, and you will be attending.
I will, yes, we'll be covering that.
I think the live producer is adding you to her show right now.
Already.
Liane Morejon, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank
for being
you.
here.
And I have to thank Mallory Berger quickly.
Thank you, Mallory.
Her passion is contagious.
Thank you, Mallory.